And welcome everyone to the Real Leaders for the Global Goals. I'm Kevin Edwards, your host. Alongside me, we have Stuart Holliday, the CEO of Meridian International. Stuart, how are you doing today?
It's great to be here. It's a great morning, Monday morning at Concordia, and we're delighted to be here for the UN General Assembly.
Bright and early, we got our coffee in this morning.
That's right.
But Stuart, you do a lot of work in some countries that make a lot of coffee.
Yes, that's right.
Tell our audience, or describe to our audience, your experiences and how that led up to your work with Meridian International.
So first of all, Meridian is a global leadership and diplomacy center, and what our job is to catalyze leaders to actually improve their societies, create jobs, and strengthen their economies. And so everything we do is really about training the trainers, helping these leaders, equipping them with the tools and the mindset to be effective in the global environment. So my background is really, I think, a product of growing up overseas. My father was a U.S. diplomat and ended up studying at Georgetown and served as a U.S. naval officer. So I didn't know what I wanted to do in life, but I knew that it was going to be global and international because I'd always had that exposure to other cultures as a kid. I also was very proud of being an American, and I thought we had an obligation as a country with a lot of resources and a lot of talent to spread that and help lift everybody and to have a better standard of living.
And so, Stuart, you grew up in Malawi, right? Or you were born in Malawi?
I was born in Malawi.
Okay, you're born in Malawi.
Yeah.
How long were you in Malawi?
I was supposed to be born in Texas, but I came a little early.
Okay.
So I was born in Malawi in 1965 when the country, which had been a British colony called Nyasaland, became an independent country. And we, just like today where we're competing with other great powers to open embassies around the world, to have votes right down the street here at the UN, we opened a U.S. embassy in Malawi, as we did in many of these newly independent countries. And so I don't remember it very much, but I've had the pleasure of meeting a lot of great people from Malawi over the years.
A lot of people, when they travel abroad, they get this new shift of perspective. Have you had that type of perspective change while interacting in Malawi, and how has that affected your work in relationships with the people in these foreign countries?
Well, really, my formative years, sort of high school years, came up. My father was in the Middle East. We lived in Europe. So we lived in Morocco and Kuwait and Egypt and Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
And even though I was in boarding school for a lot of that period, I went and really dove deep into those cultures and societies. And what I learned is that everybody around the world wants the same thing. They want dignity, they want security, they want food, they want a job, and they really want to be seen by their families and their communities as contributing. They want to have meaning, and I think one of the failures we have in the world today is we don't recognize it's not so much about ideology, of course, which is an issue. There are ideologies out there, but it's really about everybody having an opportunity. And once somebody has an opportunity, a lot of things change. They begin thinking differently. They also begin looking at the United States as a partner and not as a force for instability in the world.
So how does an organization like Meridian International come into another world and provide them that dignity and that community and that purpose?
Well, I think there are a lot of misperceptions about the United States. There's also a lot of best practices in the United States. Our higher education system, for example, is second to none in the world. We have an incredible entrepreneurial spirit. We allow people to fail and take risks and then grow and succeed ultimately. And I think in a lot of places in the world, that sort of sense of independence and entrepreneurship isn't necessarily rooted in those countries. And so what we do is we identify leaders in multiple sectors in these countries. We work very closely with the U.S. State Department, and then we create curated programs for them to come and do three things. One of them is to understand how our country works, how we operate both as a nation, but how we foster, the distinction between the public sector and the private sector. And we really get them out into the country, into cities around the United States where they can connect on a human level.
Oh, okay.
The second thing we do is we train them. So we actually have programs where we have mentors. We sometimes build in academic curricula and partner with universities to actually give them tools so that they can use when they get back. And the third thing is we try to create communities of interest. So if people in country X or Y are challenged with, let's say, desertification or pandemic disease, other people in other countries are dealing with those same challenges. Why not get them together to share information? Why not look at the world in terms of what are the common challenges we face? And I think that's what Meridian's role is. We're neutral. We don't have an agenda. We're nonpartisan. We're just committed to the idea of empowering leaders.
So give me an example of a country that you work with right now and how they can use that immersive program to understand more about the United States and apply that to their own community.
Sure. So we have an initiative, for example, in the Mekong Delta region. And
where is
Mekong,
that?
that's Vietnam, Laos,
Okay.
Cambodia, the countries in Southeast Asia. The Mekong River is sort of like the Amazon of Southeast Asia.
Okay.
It's the lifeblood of Southeast Asia.
Got it.
And the headwaters happen to be in China, which is interesting. But the United States has an interesting history in that region, and so this is an opportunity to look at water issues, the economy of a country that's dependent upon a river for the livelihood of trade, and also for ecotourism, for example. So that's one example. We're helping build the capacity of leaders in those countries to look at the most valuable resource they have and preserve that for the future. In other countries, we're helping journalists understand how to combat disinformation, for example, and looking at social media and looking at new tools. So the issues are very broad that we deal with. We don't deal with just one issue. What we're really dealing with is the issues that will have the biggest impact across the board in the most countries. And obviously, we're also about advancing American leadership in the world, which is very important.
Right. Okay. So advancing American leadership in the world. Now, I want to be very careful with this.
Yes.
So when you say that, what are some of the discussions that you're having with leaders in your own organization about maybe some of the ramifications that this might come along with in terms of like lack of diversity of culture and things like that?
Well, I think one of the things I want to make clear is when I talk about American leadership, I'm not talking about a political party or a person. I'm talking about the role the United States has played traditionally. Our philanthropy in the United States is bigger than our government-funded foreign assistance programs. We are a country that believes in giving back. We're a country that believes, obviously, in sharing what we know. And I think too often the news headlines are about the crisis of the day. And what we're trying to do is make sure that when people around the world look at America, they're seeing a helping hand and not simply military might or not simply a transaction that might benefit us but not them. So it's really trying to make the case that we're in the world together, and if we work together using the great values and traditions and heritage of our democratic system that we're all blessed to have and we need to nurture, that is something that has some universal appeal.
Well, I think it's really interesting because you mentioned like entrepreneurship, and that, for me, when I think of entrepreneurship, it's the driving force of capitalism, and that's how things get innovated, and that's how things get better. How are you, I guess, identifying these entrepreneurs, or what are these programs like?
Well, in most cases, there's a competition for where somebody has to propose an idea that they're going to talk about what they've done in their country, what kind of business they've created, and they're all various types of businesses. But what would they do if they had the resources and the connections to scale that business? And so they have to propose that and come to us and sort of say, here's my vision, and the best ones are the ones that get selected. And we, of course, care a lot about diversity, about gender equality. We create women today here at this conference, Meridian is partnering with the State Department and the White House. We brought these 17 women leaders that are going to be meeting here in a few minutes next door. We created a program for them for women's global economic development. That is a role that we're playing, and so we're big on looking at women as a force multiplier.
And do you think, on just a personal level, do you think more money is going to give someone more dignity and hope? And
it's not just money. It's not just money. I think it's do people feel that they're contributing? Obviously, money is a vehicle, but it is certainly not the only vehicle.
Right.
It's also about paying it forward and bringing other people along with you. So I think one of the things that we ask our leaders in our programs is actually to share what they've learned with others in their countries so that they can help people. And we find that people are most gratified when they're actually able to bring other people along with them and create more shared prosperity.
I think that's the definition of a real leader, people that can bring people together around purpose. I totally believe in that. And Meridian.
I think that's a good tagline for us.
Yeah. Hey, you can steal that all you want.
All right.
You can take that.
Okay.
You can take that. No copyright so far. So Stuart, Meridian International, obviously you're putting some funds into these social entrepreneurs that are taking on food deserts, that are taking on water supply, poverty. The United Nations has 17 goals.
Yep.
Are these goals all interrelated, and what has your experience been with these goals?
Right. Well, when I was here at the United Nations as a U.S. ambassador, I focused on the Security Council. So those were more of the peacekeeping, sanctions, counterterrorism, security issues. But obviously, I got exposed to the bully pulpit that the United Nations represents. And I think everybody looks at the United Nations as sort of what's the benchmark for how the world feels about itself. What people forget is it is an organization, but it's really run by the member states. The member states are the board of directors. And so if you're thinking about it as a company, it's sort of like your annual meeting. And what do you talk about in your annual meeting? And I think if you look at corporations and, for example, what the Business Roundtable just put out, about it's not just about making profits. It's also about caring for employees, caring for communities and shareholders. There's a whole shift, and maybe the UN was actually a little bit ahead of the game in 2015 and before, when the goals were set out, moved to 17 from 8. But I think these are big challenges. They're hard to measure, right? Because they're big, broad goals. But every country has a different, approach to them.
Sure.
That's why a meeting like this is so important. And at Meridian, we're not using the goals necessarily as a playbook, but if we can advance, progress on some of those goals, that's a win for us. As well as obviously looking for ways to help the United States in that process.
Well, Stuart, appreciate your time here on Leaders for Global Goals.
I love the magazine, by the way.
You do? Appreciate it. I do too.
Yeah.
I like it. Well, Stuart, the last question I have for you is, I already gave you my definition, but what's your definition of a real leader?
I think a real leader is somebody that's a global leader, meaning they understand other cultures, they understand how to collaborate, and they understand how to communicate. And I think those three things, we talk about hard skills, and do you know how to read a balance sheet? Do you have a good marketing department? But if you can do those three things as a leader, you're going to be effective not only at home, but around the world.
All right, folks. Well, you heard it here live from Concordia with Stuart Holliday, the CEO of Meridian International. Stuart, appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.